Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We are in the Gospel of Matthew, and we just completed the Kingdom Sermon in chapter 18. And now we're in chapter 19. We're going to be reading verses 1 through 12, and here's the passage you've all been waiting for. The passage that in adult Bible class I always make sure an elder is teaching and not me. The passage in Matthew chapter 19 about marriage and divorce. And there's a parallel passage which I would call your attention to and ask you to read as well from the Gospel of Mark. That's in Mark chapter 12. And so I want to call your attention to that. Also Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4, which is the passage, the Old Testament passage that Jesus has to deal with today. And then the creation account that Jesus quotes from Genesis chapter 2. These all are brought to bear. The whole issue of divorce has been a very divisive issue in the churches of Christ and in our culture. And a lot of damage has been done by divorce. A lot more damage has been done since divorce became easy. And secular sources and studies just bear this out. And it has become, in some instances, a shibboleth issue, an issue that divides congregations, that divides factions within congregations. We bring so many questions to this text that are not brought in the text, and try to extrapolate out from what Jesus has to say, and try to enforce those extrapolations. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to stick to what Jesus has said. Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 through 12. Came about that when Jesus had finished these words, he left Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. So now we're heading to Judea, to Jerusalem. His public ministry is coming to an end. His Galilean ministry is over, and he's coming. He's heading to Jerusalem to be crucified. So this is late in Jesus' ministry. Great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. And some Pharisees came to him, testing him, saying, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause at all?" And he answered and said, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? For this cause a man shall leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." He's quoting Genesis 1:27, Genesis 2:24. Consequently, they are no more two, but one flesh. What God has joined together, let no man separate. They said to him, "Why then did Moses command to give her a certificate of divorce?" He said to them, "Because of the hardness of your heart, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it has not been this way. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for immorality, fornication, poneros, not adultery." Let's be specific and use the words that are in the text. Of course, Jesus is speaking Aramaic, but these are the words that this is the very vocabulary word the Holy Spirit inspired to be in the text. Fornication, not adultery. Anyone who divorces his wife, verse 9, except for the cause of fornication, immorality, and marries another, commits adultery. The disciples said to him, "If the relationship of a man with his wife is like this, it's better not to marry." And he said to them, "Not all men can accept this statement, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who are made eunuchs by men, And there are also eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. He who is able to accept this, let him accept it. In Mark's passage, two other details are added. The first detail is Jesus says, and if she marries, divorces her husband and marries another, making it putting them on equal footing. That in itself is an amazing thing, because in Judaism and in the Roman Empire, women did not have the ability to initiate a divorce. But Jesus gives, in the Gospel of Mark, women the ability to initiate a divorce for infidelity in the same way men are given the ability to initiate divorce for the cause of infidelity. Jesus goes back to creation as he always does. The Pharisees were arguing amongst themselves. You had one faction that said the Old Testament passage, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, you can only divorce your wife, a man can, if he finds some uncleanness in her. That's kind of a general term. It's almost always, but not always, but almost always used to talk about ceremonial uncleanness, particularly associated with a sexual act in some way, which is a variety. There are a variety of ways you can, of your own free will, make yourself sexually defiled in the Old Testament. And so fornication seems to be the best way to express what the law is getting at in Deuteronomy 24. So you had one faction that said it has to be infidelity, and the other faction said, no, this uncleanness can mean a lot of things. In fact, it doesn't even have to mean a sexual thing. It just means you find you're dissatisfied with your wife. It's unclear that there were many divorces at all among the Jews in Palestine at this time, but they wanted the ability. And you can see that in the text, because when Jesus says, from the very beginning, God joined man and woman together. They reflect God's image. God does the joining, and no human being has the right to mess that up. And so the Pharisees bring up, wait a minute, the law, yes, you were, because you don't live in a perfect world. You live in the world that you sinful people have made. And therefore, because of the hardness of your hearts, God, made this exception, but it wasn't that way from the beginning. That was never God's intention. And that's what Jesus says. And that's all I'm going to say about that. It's clear. It's straightforward. There's no misunderstanding it. The disciples, it's interesting, say, then if this is the way it's going to be, we shouldn't marry. And the thing that really perplexes me in this passage is that line, not all men accept this statement, but those to whom it has been given. I don't know what he means by that. Maybe something along the lines of what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 about living a celibate life, when he says not all men have my gift of living a celibate life. I wish all men had that gift, but they don't. And you can read 1 Corinthians 7, the first 10 verses or so, if you want to look that up. But I do believe that the verse about eunuchs, verse 12, he's not talking about necessarily physical castration, although that's there. Some men are that way. Some men were born unable to perform. Some men were made eunuchs by other people, and some make themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom. I think he's talking about the physical alteration, but about living celibate life. That, listen, if you can't bear up under God's laws about sexual morality, then you have to live a celibate life. And I think that's what he says. I think that's clear in the passage. And it is difficult for some to bear up under this, but that's what Jesus says. It's based upon God's eternal will. And I will neither add to nor take away from it. So I will bid you adieu till next time. Thank you for joining me for what is now 10 good minutes with the Word.